that is fairer than day, and by faith we can see from afar. For our Father waits over the land to prepare a dwelling place. There's a land that is fairer than day, and by faith we can see from afar. For our Father waits over the land to prepare a dwelling place. There's a land that is fairer than day, and by faith we can see from afar. For our Father waits over the land to prepare.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to Spotlight Conversations. My name is Tandy, your host for the afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. Today we are talking about the land, and we're looking at everything that concerns you in relation to this topic. And so I'm hoping that you will send through your comments and your questions. Again, a reminder, please send them through as early so that we can actually get to them, because we do see the conversations afterwards, and sometimes we wish we could have actually seen it as we're talking. So I'm not alone, as usual. I have my panel. We have our resident Mfundisi, Mfunsunkosi. Welcome, Mfundisi. And then we have two guests who are joining us, known faces to the community. We have Elder Titi Mupinga. We call him Uncle Titi. Welcome, Uncle Titi.
Thank you.
And then we've got Elder Sanele Gomet as well, one of our elders here. Welcome, Zala. Awesome. So, Mfundisi, we're talking about land, and I know we are itching to bring it back to our shores here because it's already a topical issue. But I'd like us to start with just the recent happenings in the last week and a half or so in Palestine. Can you take us through how did we get there? Before we even look at who's right, who's wrong, if we even go there, how did we get there? This war between Israel and Palestine, how did we get there?
There are three dimensions to the war between Israel and Palestine. One is simple, the other is complex, the other one is complicated. The simple one is that it is brothers fighting, Ishmael and Isaac. It's interesting that both names start with an I. So the I in the self is the problem in Israel. No I wants to be defeated by the other I. I have a suspicion that the Palestinians argue that the evacuation of the Jews from Israel throughout the centuries made them lose the right to be in the land. But the Israelis, after 1948, the United Nations declared a fiat around the return of the Israelites. Not only were they persuaded by political motivations, they were also persuaded by religious motivations. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is very complex. It is complicated by a religious factor. There are forces in America and invisible forces around the world who support Israel based on the Bible. And what I don't understand is why they castigate Ishmael, because he was not cursed. He was also given a right to own. If Abraham rose up today, he would wonder why the kids are fighting. So Adventists need to be careful when they discuss the conflict in the Middle East. It's a family conflict. Conflict complicated by ideologies. Each one of them is pursuing a supremacist view of the land. This is our home. Remember also that one of the reasons why the Palestinians are arguing was that the Israeli state, as it exists now, is an artificial state. It was created after the Second World War. Ben-Gurion, who was the first prime minister of Israel, made a declaration, very simple declaration, in order to reconstitute the current Israeli nation. He said, anybody who feels that he's an Israeli and senses that there's Israeli blood in him can come and declare that he's in. There were no laws. There was just a declaration. So all you did was to walk into the border gate and declare that you were an Israelite. And that's how they constituted that state. It created an interesting incident when a Carmelite monk, who was a Jew by nationality, had come from another country. He walked into Israel and they said, "But you are dressed like a monk." He said, "No, but I'm an Israeli." Ben-Gurion then wrote to all the foreign ministers and scholars of the Jewish community around the world and said, "Could you give me a definition of what it means to be a Jew?" It was a very interesting discourse. They sent reports, their responses. Ultimately, Ben-Gurion came to one simple thing, a simple statement, that an Israelite is someone who senses that he's an Israelite and declares that he's an Israelite. And that's how the Carmelite monk was admitted into citizenship. So it was a declared state, not necessarily a created state.
Yeah. So Mfundisi, though, the Bible is clear that the promise made to Abraham by God was through Isaac.
Yes.
So Ishmael ungenaphi ke
But
apho?
Ishmael was not cursed.
But the promise was through
Yeah.
Isaac.
That does not mean that Ishmael cannot have a stake in the world. Look how many they've grown, Ishmaelites, your Arabs.
Well, true. And I want to bring it in here, gentlemen. I would think then that's why the Israelites feel justified to that land. And I mean, even when you look at just biblical history, so even you can see when God was upset with them, they'd get chased out of the land or exiled, but then he'd bring them back to the land because that's the promised land. And he'd then say, whoever you find there, kill them, cats, dogs, children, all of that. So why would we then think that they don't think that cycle is still continuing even now?
I have a question around the chosenness. I think post the crucifixion, the Jews are no longer a chosen people. They said, "Let his blood fall on us and our generations." They cast themselves that Friday. And this is why they're getting retribution from all corners of the world. It's an eternal punishment. But countries that are anti-Islamic hide behind a pseudo-biblical promise, which no longer applies now. God no longer has a nation as chosen people. He has people who follow him as a chosen people. Which is why in the book of Acts, all of us who surrender our lives to Jesus Christ become part of the modern spiritual Israel.
So I can walk in there and declare myself Israeli.
Especially
as
because
well.
you are dark-skinned, they will declare you the original Jews. The original Jew. Because they've ultimately accepted the fact that historical Jews were dark-skinned persons.
You are nodding there and going, yeah, quite a lot. Would you like to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Sandy. I think, obviously, I'm not a subject matter expert, but one of the things that, even in preparing for this afternoon, that I realized that there is a strong connection between human beings and land. And there's definitely a reason why there's so much this feud between these two nations. It's because there is some significance that they see in the possession of the land. When you think about land, before even coming into the context of the discussion of what's happening in the Middle East, you think before we were human beings, God created us through soil. We come from dust. And as we live through dust. When we die in dust. And when you look at the creation account, everything that we are eating, where we lived, there is that constant touch with humans and land. So if I can try to be a bit philosophical, is that, looking at the birth or the creation and the death, that land somehow has a link between our beginning and our or maybe our temporal end or our eternal end. Because at the end of the day, when you die, you go back to the land. So for me, with land, there's some sort of identity. There's some sort of background. Land gives you purpose. And the reason why, perhaps, there is this feud, not only there, maybe we'll still come here to South Africa as well. The reason why we are fighting so much for land is because there's much value that we derive from there. some of them, as we know, in the Middle East, beyond just religion, it's a cultural thing, or beyond culture, it's a religious thing. To say, even back when we read about in the Old Testament, they call them high places of worship. To say there were certain areas that were declared as areas of worship. So if you move me from that land, you are moving me from my connection with my God.
Uncle Titi, so Umfundisi Nosanele, to some extent, are saying there's nothing special about Jerusalem anymore to us Christians, because it's no longer about the Israelites in that place. Christ made it that we are all children of Abraham somehow.
Well, I agree. There is nothing special about Jerusalem. I know history tells us that the Palestinians want Jerusalem to be their capital. The Israeli want, but there is really nothing so special about it. Before I go there, I just want to augment what Elder Sanele is saying. Land is the single most important resource in any country. Yeah. It sustains lives and livelihoods. You know, you can make water in a laboratory setting. You can even make oxygen in an experiment, but you can never make land. Doesn't matter what it or whatever else. Things change. Behaviors change. Environments change. Land never changes. It is there as a permanent feature. It is a gift from God and our ancestors. And I know we Adventists, as soon as you start saying ancestors, emotions start running high. But ancestors are merely those that have gone before us, those that we follow. So land, even though I know in the Middle East they are trying to reclaim land, but they are reclaiming land that was originally there. They may, the Palm Island perhaps in the Middle East that they're digging from the seas, but it's there already. It's there, they're just repositioning, relocating this land to develop further. So the land is a very emotive subject. It doesn't matter where you go to. And like Sanele said, it brings us our identity as human beings, our dignity, our sense of belonging. You know, there are certain rituals that we do. Even in our traditions, if a child is born, we take the umbilical cord and bury it as a symbolic in the fact that we are continuing in our unbreakable, perhaps, connection with the earth. I want to come back to Jerusalem. Jerusalem is a part of God's creation, God's created land. In as much as Springbok or Tsinsa I was talking to you about just now is. And God values all his creation, all the land that he has created. Us human beings want to put certain places on a pedestal because of the use that we put those things to. But in effect, we have our own here. We have our own Jerusalem, the way we're sitting on now. And God looks at that and says, if you can pay homage to me, using what I created, glory be to God. So there's nothing special about Jerusalem, at least not as far as we are concerned. We see it as a propagandist. In fact, sorry, I'm taking too much time, but I want to mention that many people have said, or somebody has said, you know, the battles, all the battles in the book of Joshua were simply one ancient tribe violently destroying another, and using God. Then after they've destroyed that, they use God's name to underwrite their own territorial advancement and way of life, like what Israel is doing now. It's merely an expansionist program that they have conjured up in their minds, which perhaps may not have been God's plan in the first place, but we see it unraveling.
So what I'm hearing, and before we move on from the Middle East, is that the war in the Middle East, the war between the Israelites and the Palestinians, is not a religious war. It's a political war between different nations who are fighting over land. And why I'm asking this is because as the religious community, including as Christians, feel some type of way, because we then define it as it's a religious war, and we date it back to when God then said you can have this. So if we're saying no, it's just a territorial war between different nations, then whatever stance I take about it is from a political perspective, not from a religious perspective. Am I hearing you correctly?
The religious perspective, because a lot of us in the world are Christians, tends to lend credence to itself, unjustified credence to itself, because it appeals to Christian sentiment. And we forget that Christianity is no longer a pure religion. You get a point? In the first place, it is highly adulterated by Western superstitions, philosophies, and it has also been used to advance the goals of colonizing countries. Therefore, Israel acts now as a launching pad against an anti-Western nationalism, primarily from the Islamic communities and from other communities. Their advantage is that they are light-skinned. If they were black, they original as their ancestors were dark-skinned, they would not receive so much attention from America, Britain, and other big powers.
Just a reminder at home to anyone who's watching, we are live, so please join us. Send your comments and your questions through, and let the gentleman here basically give you a response. So, let me ask you this. Can anyone ever claim to own land?
Can I take that one, Sandy? I think it'll sort of dovetail from what Obaba have mentioned. Again, I actually identified different angles to approach this discussion, and I chose to stick to one. So all my answers will be relevant to that. There's a word that I read. I don't know if other versions use the same word, subjugate. That was one of the instructions beyond just tilling the land. The instruction that God had given to Adam and Eve. One of the instructions was to subjugate the land. So meaning that as human beings, we are intended to take control of the land, right? To be in power of the land, and we're instructed to fill the land, to populate the land. Now what has happened is that human beings have subjugated other human beings. Now, if you subjugate the human being, you're also subjugating the land that they possess. And whoever possesses your land possesses you. And I think that maybe one of the reasons we are having these discussions in different contexts is because some of us believe, or we know that, for instance, if we are the Israelis, we believe that this is our land. And therefore, if you're going to control our land, we are then inevitably meaning that you're going to be controlling us. So that's why then there will always be this power struggle if someone wants to control it. And look at South Africa as an example. We always, if you travel to all the provinces in South Africa, you'll see that, I'll use the Western Cape as an example. If you're on the plane, you will see, there's a house there, and the values of those properties are significantly high that every South African will not afford. But as soon as you land at Cape Town International Airport, around you see the squatter camps and who is living there. So that's why there's this element then to say, for us as humans, there's so much land around, but you'll find there is a lot of talk amongst Africans to say we want the land because we were here first. I'll put it that way. But then that land has been taken away from us. And then by virtue of that being the case, the areas where it's affordable, you'll find black people. But in the areas where it's not affordable, you find white people. So by virtue of that being the case, you are now then seeing that there is land available for everyone. But because not everyone can afford the value that has been attached to that land, which is land that was you and I should be staying in. But because someone has taken that land away from us, they've also taken the power and the influence from us as well.
So taking from your answer, what you're saying is that there is ownership of land. Because you're saying your land. I mean, you used your land, their land.
Yeah.
So there is. Why I'm asking this is because. Okay, wait, no. Just answer that. Then I want to continue with my thought.
So again, that's why I was saying this dovetails from what Ubaba was saying. So spiritually and biblically speaking, there was an instruction for all of us to multiply and take over and fill the land, right? But the unfortunate part is that there are other influences that came beyond that. And as a result, now there's a separation. You know, it's often said that Africa, as an example, did not have borders. So you could literally, go to Zimbabwe if you wanted to. But because we are now living in a time beyond God's ideal, where we are now, separated to say, you are a South African, you are a Zimbabwean, because we're living in a time post a period that maybe perhaps I would arguably say was God's ideal for us to freely move between, in the continent, in other continents as possible. So that was the ideal. But reality says, because now we've adopted external influences, specifically speaking to Africa as a continent, which now have told us that you are a South African, so you stay here. I can no longer freely. As a matter of fact, it will be a crime for me to, go to the winelands and, put my ikukwane lam in the winelands. So I'll probably be short.
So let's take it. I'll come to you, Mfunis, to the Genesis mandate. Wasn't the mandate more stewardship than ownership?
That land is to us a site of function, not a site of ownership. The land belongs to the Creator.
Yeah.
There is no scientific formula for creating land. You can't. There's nobody who can produce land, even in the best laboratories. There's something unique about land, and there's also something unique about the darkness of the land.
Okay.
Yeah, but let's not go that way. We may come back there. All I want to say is all arguments that favor dispossession of land are flawed logically and epistemically and historically and biblically. All of them are flawed. The land was never meant to be sold in the Bible. It was never meant to be owned by another permanently. You could own it for 50 years only if you had captured it, or if it had been leased to you, or more than 50 years if it had been given to you. The crisis we have here is not the land question. It is not even the Freedom Charter. It is nothing to do with anything outside of whites bringing deleterious Christianity to Africa. The Bible was raped by whites. It was given a wrong application here. It was given a white cover when it was not in the one written by them. The whole of the Bible, if you read the Bible carefully, there is a lot of African cultural practices, the polygamy, wealth ownership, the Jubilee system, for instance. Protestants claim, Adventists, it's strange that Adventists say the whole Bible is the canon, but they will not read the book of Deuteronomy and Levi and reclaim the land. We're being deceived here by an incomplete Adventist practice.
So, but again, your terminology is implying ownership, because you can't reclaim something that you don't own. So if our mandate was stewardship, then the next steward has arrived to continue stewardship. Why are we fighting for something as if say owner then, if our mandate is stewardship?
Okay. Land is neither a commodity, nor was it ever meant to be a possession of an individual. So when you then say the next person has arrived, the next steward has arrived, where has the previous one
Good.
gone to? Because the previous one is still there. You see, any and every political struggle is primarily a struggle for land.
Yeah.
Look at Israel and Palestine we're talking about. Look at the situation in Zim. Look at the situation in Angola. Look at even the situation in the United States. They displaced the native Indians.
Yeah.
Look at the Aborigines. Look at the Maoris in the other lands. It's a strategy that they've used, like Mfundisi is saying, that they come in here with a Bible. You know, I was reading this morning about 17 December 1652 when Jan van Riebeeck came to the Cape, which is I hope we are going to talk about it. And the missionaries came, and the British came, and the Dutch came, and what are they holding? A Bible. And they then seek to subdue. What was it? That one. On the basis of that. Yeah. And you know, Deuteronomy, the Bible says in Deuteronomy, I think 10, God says, go and possess the land. And this is where I think the confusion of whether we own or we are custodians begin. It also says in Deuteronomy 6, the cities that you have not built, the vineyards that you have not planted, and you are going to benefit from them. So, and they are doing this against the backdrop of people that have built those cities, people that have planted those vineyards, who are still there. And we see in Israel or in Israeli minds this notion that we are privileged. And I think Jakafula mentioned it this morning at Sabbath school, that we are better than you. We deserve this and not you. And we are going to take it whether you like it or not because we are more powerful than you.
I just want to read the comment. Sorry, brother, I'll come to you. There's a comment from Sikana Andrew. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing this. Sumbwa. He's in Nairobi. Hi. He says, if our focus is heaven, why do we so much focus on earthly issues? It is so important to have land as it is an asset. Kono, I think this is now Swahili, our paramount focus should be heaven. How possible will it be to focus heavenward when we have issues earthly dear to our hearts, like land? And I think this is the big debate amongst Christians, isn't it? When it comes to how far do I go in this debate that's happening, for example, currently in South Africa in relation to land. Sorry, I'll cut you off there, and then I'll come to you from this.
Okay. Thanks, Andy. I think using your illustration to say we are stewards, and if someone comes and comes after you, then it's the next steward that's taking over. I think reading about Zulu history as an example, one thing that I find consistently, and funny enough, I've recently discovered it as well, in my farming, ventures. To say when you go to the rural areas, people are so trusting. They are so giving. They are so knowledgeable. I remember saying to one of our, friends that, you have so much knowledge, you can sell it and be wealthy. He's like, no, I'm just sharing it. Now, the next steward coming to take over, I think one of the things we have to consider is the how. How did the next steward come and take over? A simple example, you drive past Vets around 6 p.m. in the afternoon. You see, student cars coming out, but you also see another string of students going to take a taxi. And the black children or the children that don't have cars are not concentrating as much as the ones that have cars in that lecture room. And the results, obviously, would favor the ones who are much more relaxed, who are not thinking of the fact that I still need to take a taxi to Bree. From Bree, I need to take a train to go to Soweto. From Soweto, I'm taking a train. So the issue is that whether we're talking ownership, I think one of the things that grieve us is how this next steward took over the land. Because at the end of the day, it left me, who was here before, deprived. That is the issue.
Well, okay, so firstly, he's got land. I need to say it is farming, so he clearly is already sorted. So what I wanted to say, though, was in the question of how, or Mfundisi, I know you wanted to respond to our guest.
I have this starting point in my thinking about land, that no one owns the universe but the maker. No one owns this earth except the maker. Therefore, all of us need to start from we are not owners but stewards. But stewardship is practiced within a certain time and place limit. Whites were given Europe. They should not have invaded Africa because this is our territory of stewardship. Which is why they harmed us by coming into the wrong space. Which is why I support the land reclamation movement. The one I do not support is negotiations, because I don't know for how long we're going to do that. In as much as the land was taken by force, to a certain extent, force might need to be applied. Unfortunately, it's too late to apply force. But whites are not going to release land because they've also harmed it by let me tell you one of the things that whites have used the land for. They are hiding a lot of weapons in the land. That's one of the reasons why they will not surrender the land, because they need a decade to remove all the weapons, and in the process they'll be creating other strategies not to leave. I have this view ultimately that the devil has found a fitting instrument to advance his nefarious plans all over the world, because whites have gone around. They are known, whites globally, to have gone around fiddling with people's land ownership. It's their greatest sin. And it's time we told even those who are in the Adventist church to tell us how they got to own the land. They'll quote title deeds. From whom did they get titles? From illegal governments.
So Mfundisi, the West went around dispossessing people of their land, and they fought whichever way. So did the dark-skinned Israelites, right? They get to Canaan and they fight, and they're mandated to kill everyone, cats, dogs, and all. So isn't that the format of taking over the land when it's now your turn to be the steward? They
were mandated by God, but the Boers and the English get a mandate from God to rip us of our land, to rape our women, to create slavery. To get a point? Were the Islamic forces mandated to enslave blacks? By the way, Islamic enslavement of blacks was worse than the white enslavement of blacks.
So
it's just that historians don't talk much about it.
So are we claiming Africa because, well, first come, first served?
Not necessarily. Remember, the Bible makes it clear that God placed nations in their specific areas. That's why you can't go to England and claim land, but they can cross the seas and come here and demand land. Yeah. Why is Zimbabwe where it is? Because they refused to have whites mine diamonds there, because the diamonds were found on the surface in forests. The government didn't know that there were diamonds in that region. Whites were coming with certificates, licenses to do soil study, and so Zimbabwean government thought they were doing soil study, and they were removing diamonds from the land until they discovered these diamonds. Then they closed the whole area, and Zimbabwe was punished because it refused to surrender diamonds to Britain and other countries.
Uncle Titi, let me bring you in here. I don't want us to ignore Andrew. Andrew is saying, aren't we focused on things that are actually going to be delaying us from focusing on things that should be taking us to heaven? Is this not just a distraction from what we actually should be focusing on?
Well, you can focus on heaven if you want to, but you have no home to live in. You have no field to plow. You have no guarantee of food. You know, there's an African proverb that said that says, if you, I did quote it here, if you sell your father's land to buy a trumpet, where will you stand to blow it? That's how I'm going to answer you.
Listen, Sister Tandi, I think we've come to a very crunch point here, especially for Adventists, whites who own land. How did they get the land after reading chapters 50 and 51 of Patriarchs and Prophets? That land must not be owned for more than 50 years by anyone who enslaves you, by anyone who captures you because you owed him. It says the land must be released to its rightful owners. And it says you don't remove the buildings you placed there. Even says, for I, the Lord, does not like landless people. It's in the Bible.
I want to some of the things I was thinking about. I think I'm happy that this question came up. There's an expression that always troubles me, and this expression says, as Christians, we must be mindful not to be heavenly useful but earthly useless. To say whenever there are current topical discussions, as Christians, we must have a biblical standpoint to contribute to those current and topical discussions. And most of the time, perhaps in my personal observation, is that we are found wanting whenever topical discussions are taking place that are affecting us now. And what I'm learning and I'm appreciating is we go into this land thing, is that one point is someone said if one of the reasons maybe why as African people there's confusion amongst us in terms of purpose and direction is because we have not appreciated where we come from. And one of my initial contributions was land gives me identity. When I try and find out who was my father, where did he come from, what is my heritage as Usanele living in 2021 as an example. I'll give you, if you study the story of Ushaga and the Zulu nation, you'll find that certain surnames, they specialized in certain things. You'll find Abagambonambi as an example. They helped Ushaga to put together his spears and all those kinds of things. So imagine if I have that flowing in my blood living today. And not that maybe I'll be good in manufacturing weapons. And maybe the reason why I'm dwindling wherever I'm dwindling is because I'm trying to find myself. So if I understand which maybe parts of land I come from, who were my people, what did we used to do as a people, maybe I can then find that identity and therefore be able to recognize where my purpose is. Now, if I have to focus on heaven and not think about now, recently, last year when the pandemic began, people were panic buying, and I was sitting there and saying, look, I don't have all the money in the world, but even if I did have the money in the world, all the money in the world, I will not be able to buy all the food that is available. And it brought me then to a conclusion to say, then why don't I manufacture my own food? And to be able to do that, what do I need? I need to have land. So whether there's food in the grocery shop or not, I know that I'm secure. Yes, I'm preparing for heaven, but I need to eat now. And we one of the struggles in South Africa is electricity. If I know that I'm living in the land where I can be off the grid, I'm not affected whether there is electricity or not. I'm able to survive. And again, this issue, I wanna stick to that example of education. Think about a child who lives in a shack where it's just one room, and they're living. We've been to some of the areas around here when you're doing community service. You'll find that there's a family here. You just move a curtain. There's another family, staying there. If I'm not worried about land, how is my child going to move out of their situation and be able to be in a place where they can study? We think about even now social distancing. If I'm living in a shack, how do I social distance? So I cannot say I'm worried about, this land thing is a temporary matter. And I think that's, again, personally speaking, one of the challenges that we have as Christians, to say we are so heavenly focused that we forget about the issues that are affecting us here. And it is, I think it's John that says, if we say we love God, we love other humans or we love God, how can we, love a God whom we don't know and yet, we don't love the people that we are staying with here? So it's important for me to be part of the conversations that are going to help people to have a better life here and make them suitable candidates for the life to come.
Can I read these comments? I'll come to Uncle Titi. So there's a comment from, I know who this is. It says, Victory Coupe, I know who you are. It says, I don't believe God is going to send down Jesus with all these issues being unresolved. These issues and many more are part of the reasons why we have not experienced him the way we should. We are here to stay shame. We need to be ethically relevant as Christians. And then Andrew, Sekana Andrew, has responded, Uti Babangosi, thank you for your response, but guess what? We have places like Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Tanzania where they have plenty of land. Guess right now the Chinese are getting it. Our own black people don't get interested in the land which is abundant. And when they get it, they don't make it productive. I personally own land and cultivate it and keep animals, like Sinele does. And this argument has come up. I want you to think about it as I come to Uncle Titi, that blacks are gonna, and Zimbabwe is used as an example. They get this land and then they don't know what to do with it, and then it lays there to waste, and people are actually worse off than when whites were actually dealing with this land. So I want you to think about that as I come to your comment. Sorry, I cut you off there.
Oh, that's fine. My comment was God creates man and places him in the garden. And he says everything is at your disposal. Work the land, till the land, subjugate it. Christ, as he prays, says, I pray for these people, from these disciples of mine, but I leave them here on earth. If you are so intent for us to focus only on heaven, you perhaps would have carried them with him there. But he leaves us here to be responsible people, to do what we are supposed to do here on earth, to till the land and manufacture weapons like my brother would want to do. But we have a responsibility in the land that God created. Until such time as God says, I'm taking you home, I'm creating a new earth, and a new heaven and a new earth, we have a responsibility towards the earth that was created for us.
And even that new heaven, it's temporary. We're going to come back to the new earth.
Yes.
So there'll still be the land issue then,
the land.
if that's the case, because we're going to come back to earth. Mfundis, what do you say to that argument that says, but Africans, this is our mosh. Look at what the whites have been able to do with the land, and then as soon as they walk away or we kick them out and all of that, then look at the damage that actually, because we don't know what to do with this land.
That question comes from ignorance of African history.
Yes, sir.
We used the land before 1652. It was stolen from us through war, through wrong legislation. We were not in these parliaments where whites stole land. It was used, land was grabbed through trickery in some cases. People were given bangles. You know, the history of colonization is a very dastardly story. Highly inflaming in its text. One of the reasons why whites colonized us was the inferior creation. That was the problem. That we could not use this land, own this land when we were in inferior creation. And they pumped this idea in the hearts and minds of their children, which is why most whites can't speak isiZulu, but most blacks speak English. You get the point? Even this capture of our languages, the restriction of the use of our languages, their development into economic languages is part of there's nothing as bad as colonization, which is why Ellen White says the sin of slavery that America committed against blacks, they will suffer for.
Yeah. Before you go on, Tandy, this will presses a nerve for me. Looking at the fact that this argument, we've heard of even here in South Africa through the land that has been restored to other people. We hear that when the previous owners were bought off by government and the land was given to black people, then things just went south. One of our members, I won't mention his name. He mentioned that it's okay. At the end of the day, I have dignity because I have land. I may not be able to produce as as the previous owner produced, because think about it, they had so many years. From generation to generation, probably the previous owner is maybe the third, if not the fourth generation of someone who owned land. So that's why they had that experience. And we, as the people who were removed from those areas, lost then that understanding of how to take care of the land and how to take care of cattle, as an example. So the mere fact that if I may be given land today and I'm not able to work it, should not be reason enough for me not to get the land, because we knew how to take care of the land before. But because of our terrible history, we're deprived of that. And let me not. But another example, it's a topical, controversial issue, as if I may mention it, on this point of the fact that as African people, we knew how to do things before. One of the things is today we're talking about taking care or training the boy child, as an example, or empowering the girl child. As AmaZulu, as you go through life stages, you get taught at a particular age, now you gonna start growing hair in certain places. As a young lady, certain things are going to happen to you. Things are gonna start to develop. And these are things that we think came from the West. That you must sit down and have a talk with your child. But these are things that we did as communities. So going back even to the issue of taking care of the land, these were things that as a young man you were taught, and that's why some of the older men here tell you that we grew up in the farms, herding cattle and so forth. But because of the colonization that happened here in apartheid, we were moved from the lands that we used to be able to do these things, and as a result, that's why today, if someone gets given land, they're not able to use it. But again, it should not be the fact that because I cannot use it now, I should not get it.
I would not, again, and I like asking this question because we also seem to have a romantic view of pre-1652. I would not just romanticizing what Africans were capable of. I mean, we were not nomads. Isn't that how some of us ended up here? It's because we were basically walking around looking for water, and then we'd settle, and then until a certain time, then we move on, and then we'd settle. We're not farmers of like tilling and all of that. We had livestock, yes, maybe, but we're not just romanticizing our ability to settle in a land and take care of it.
Well, we were good then. Even that nomadic life, we were fine.
Yeah.
One of the reasons why we fail when we get the land back, I'm going to tell you this. My brother here next to me is a banker. He's never going to extend 50 million rand for me to buy the equipment needed to sustain a farming activity. To the extent, these whites had guarantees. Even now, they have guarantees from major big banks.
Yeah.
And they will not extend those to you and me for me to be able to then sustain operations as big as they would have been. And I'm not saying that this is the only reason. We also have other factors that have come in, corruption. We also have other factors that have affected our, the few elites that have benefited from the land. Some of them, it's too much for them. 4, 5, 6, 7 farms. They're obviously not going to be able to till that, to work on those lands. But primarily, looks like we were captured. The white men, the colonizer, let me put it that way, said, I'm going to render them useless to be able to do things for themselves. Yeah. And as soon as I've done that, I know if I kill this generation, I've killed the rest.
Yeah. And Victory Coupe agrees with you. She says, it is no surprise that we do not know, quote unquote, what to do with it. The knowledge has been taken away, and the importance of tilling the soil has been diminished from the mind, which is exactly what you're saying, is that over time, that knowledge basically has, because it has been a couple of centuries already.
We have a major task to commit our energies now to the restoration of everything Afrocentric and biblical. It's a major project. But we can start in a local community and change it. By the way, the state of Israel did not begin as large as it has become historically now. It began as small communities, and people invested. Those who were light-skinned invested in them. What we need in this continent is African leaders to tell the UN, European community, and all these big countries that own jets and so on, to get away from our backs. We want to have an indaba in the family. Unfortunately, you have got political leaders who are so much in love with Anglo-American, the Ruperts, the Queen of England in America. They are so much in love, they think they will starve if whites leave. We shall not starve. This continent is abuzz with food. The reason why whites are here is that the whole of Africa from Cape to Cairo is a mineral plate. That's the reason why they're here. There's no country in Africa that does not have minerals. God blessed this continent. Yeah. God bless this continent. The problem is our political leaders. They've been demented. The other thing that has demented the African ethos is the wrong Christianity that was brought here. The Christianity that was brought here was half biblical, wholly pagan, including Adventist Christianity.
So we have less than 10 minutes remaining, and I want us to start wrapping up. Yeah. What do we do? So we've established the fact that there's an issue. We've established the fact that it is our issue, so we can't walk away from it and say, I know Tina Slinde Luches. Because, again, here's another comment. It says, how can we enjoy the idea of heaven when we refuse to accept the idea that Christ has come to give us life abundantly here, right? So we've established the fact that Christ actually wants us here. How do we move forward? I want you to think about that as I read these entries on fire today. So he says, Babangosi, we know the original owners, and we appreciate the question is like that of the parable of the talents. Let us look at being given land and not using it. The question is why? If South Africa is yet to distribute the land to the indigenous, why are we failing to utilize the land to our greatest potential? It is not okay to bury our talents in the ground. It is unfortunate, but taking care of the land is no rocket science. It's all about hard work. And then he says, I never grew up on a farm, but I have worked on our farm, on our hard land. And I think we have touched on this, is that some of that knowledge, that indigenous knowledge that we may have had, has been rubbed off over the years. Are we not being too idealistic by thinking that we can then just get the land back and that's it, all will be fine? Africa will be able to take care of itself and feed itself and all of that.
What we need to do, I want to start with the Adventist Church. What we need to do is to remove all Europeanness from this faith. Bibles were not written by Europeans. European culture has sunk us, just as it has sunk them. They now have a lot of multiple doctrines because of their culture, which is centered in me, not in the one who created me. Then what we need is a localized indabas. We discussed, let's say, as Kelvin, as Zola, as Orlando West, as any other church. I'm talking about Africans now. The problem is that we've got a leadership, political leadership, that has been captured by white thought. I don't care what the Ramaphosas and others will tell you. They are under capture. Europeans will not leave African politicians. Otherwise, they'll do what they've done to Zimbabwe. The problem with Zimbabwe is not the sanctions. It is the fact that there's a government there that lacks creativity. That is why it is busy harassing people. They need to be creative and say, this is the land that God gave us before 16-something. Let's create a miracle out of it. That's the problem.
And yes.
Okay. Someone once said 100% of revolutions by victims fighting their oppressors have been successful through two things. The first one is fighting back, and the second one is money. And money is what the African indigenous man does not have. So what is the option left? It's fighting back. You can toy, you can protest as much as you want. You will not get very far. So if you want to protest, to continue protesting, do just that. Fighting back, what do I mean? Don't get me wrong. I'm not referring to fighting with the guns, with the mortars. In fact, my Baba here said it's too late for that. But we have a tool that we can use to fight back, a tool that fights back smarter than guns and mortars. We have government that is full of policymakers and lawmakers that should be able to propel through changes, enabling legislation to help us get this. I know that in South Africa now they were talking about getting back the land without compensation and this and that. It's policies that like that which should not just be cheap talk, should not just be holding them with a fleece blanket, but open knuckles and decisive action, progressive action towards changing the situation of the desperate and the poor. And we know it's a time for peace, and we would very much want peace. But there are times when, for you to achieve peace, you have to go to war. And I think the time is ripe for people to stand up and say, this is what we are going to do, this is what we do not apologize for wanting to get what, I'm sounding militant now.
You are inciting, I think I was going to say, this is what our president, Mr. Ted Wilson, says. He says, stay away from topics that are divisive because of this.
Could I add to something? My model is simple. Get communities, tell government, we want to self-govern in these areas. You can govern at the political level. But here in Kelvin, we're going to have our own economy. We'll establish our own shops. We will buy from you. We don't need your contribution. We will be self-sufficient here. Whites have done that without declaring it.
This is not what the whites are trying to do. Is that something like what the whites are trying to do? With Oranje there.
Yes, whites have done that without declaring it. So if more of us would band around particular plots of land and make this thing contagious, the devil will lose ground on us. Because here is another problem. We're given a wrong education which is not agrarian. Pre-colonial education was land-based. Agrarian, whites have given their children agrarian education. Now they've moved, they've gone to computer studies, and they're all over us.
All right, I'm going to give you a minute each to just your last thoughts on this, otherwise I'm going to lose my job. So, here's a comment from Atiho Mlanjani as you're thinking. He says, in fact, there's a story of a British missionary in the 1800s who raised funds in South Africa from black commercial farmers for poor whites in Britain. He says it's in Sam Peter Blanch's book, A History of Inequality in South Africa. So it's true, we knew what to do with the land and we can relearn. Last thoughts on this, and what I want you to do is, how do we move forward in a way that doesn't compromise my Christian values in this question?
We reread the Bible and apply it in the manner Christ would have applied it.
Thank you, Mfundisi Baba.
I think it's Christians are still on earth to contribute positively to governance issues. And I think it's essential that there is increased political pressure to be brought upon at all levels to accelerate the uptake of progressive policies that strengthen or that aim to strengthen the removal of poverty, the mitigation of poverty amongst the disenfranchised.
Thank you, Sanele.
Sunday, I've attended many conferences. The only conference where I was going to attend, on the application form you were asked, will you be driving? Do you need a helipad or a landing strip? It was a conference of agriculture. And my passing shot to say, how do we influence the agenda going forward? I've learned a lot about land from the Bible. In fact, I think the bug bit me when I read the book Education, where it was speaking about what's the best, or which is the career that God would love us to do and it pointed to agriculture as an example. You get sunshine, land is therapeutic, you get fresh air, you get exercise. So that's where the bug bit me. But a couple of years ago, so if there's anyone out there, some of us now are able to buy houses for 2 million, 4 million. If there's anyone who can, I would encourage us to look into going to small holdings, try to self-sustain. Some of us work for big corporates, but the unfortunate part is that if I retire or if I pass away, they'll never take my daughter and say, you were a daughter or a child of a very powerful employee, come and work for us. But if I have my own place, my own business, my own land, I can create job opportunities for people. So I would say one of the things we can do, beyond shooting lights out, those of us who can afford, let's start investing in property, in land, and let's start being self-sustaining, and let's create jobs for people.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. Again, time is an enemy. Thank you to those of us who are watching at home. And I think if you don't take anything away from here, what you need to take is that this is where we're going to land up. God created us to be here on earth and to work the land. And the question of us looking at what our relationship with this land is not unbiblical and it's not Christian. So let's pray about it and ask God to help us to find a way to navigate this question in a way that doesn't compromise who we are, but that also doesn't put us in a position where we just sit back and become victims. My name is Thandi Balfour. Thank you for joining. We'll see you next time. And just a reminder that we are nearing the end of this season of Spotlight Conversations. We have a few episodes remaining. So don't say we didn't warn you. Thank you for being with us.
Count the months as we